So we're going to be talking about perspective today and using the perspective grid in Illustrator. So just an overview of perspective. If you haven't taken an art class before, which you haven't, I really recommend taking a drawing class and learning about perspective, or even taking an art history class to learn about it. So the Italian Renaissance was a big time for artists learning to create the illusion of three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional canvas or piece of paper. And this is a famous linear perspective drawing. So linear perspective is about lines going back to a vanishing point. And this is by Raphael, one of the Ninja Turtles, the School of Athens, painted from 1509 to 1511. And we can see all of these leading lines going back to one vanishing point. This is a one-point perspective painting. There's also a thing called atmospheric perspective. And this is a painting by Raffaello, Madonna of the Goldfinch, and we can see in this painting that as things get further away, they get blurrier, they get less saturated, they have less vibrant colors, and they get lighter in color. So that's another illusion that artists have used for centuries now to create three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface. So these are two things we're going to employ to make our perspective. And I have posted links to this stuff on Canvas, and it might help you to watch this video about atmospheric perspective because it can help you make your designs look more realistic. If you want to get into more illustration and stuff, this is a great place to start, and I always recommend taking art history or drawing class to get really great with your skills with that. So I've made these little grids just to give you an idea. There's one point perspective here that has one vanishing point. So all the perspective lines go back to that one vanishing point. And if you were to draw that line, like think of a road, if you were to draw these lines, they would intersect. And then there are the parallel lines right here, they're vertical, going up and down, that will never intersect. And that's what gives the illusion of something in perspective. We have here the horizon line, and that's where the vanishing point sits on. Some people also call it the eye level line. And then we have the ground plane down here, which would be like if you're thinking of a landscape, the ground. Then in two-point perspective, there's two vanishing points. We can see one here and here, and I think this one's easy to think of a corner of a street. Imagine this is like sidewalk, and then these are buildings on the side. So the lines in perspective go back to two different vanishing points, still on the horizon and eye level, and this is still the ground plane. And then we have three-point perspective, which can get a little tricky. So that's three different vanishing points. These orange arrows are the vanishing points, and we have perspective lines going all the way to those three. So this is what's called like a bird's eye view, or if you were looking from below, would be a worm's eye view. So that's how you create that kind of believable space. For this project, we're going to be doing two-point perspective. Okay, so the perspective tool is over here in your toolbar. It looks like this. I'll right click on it so you can see it, the perspective grid tool. And if you don't see it, like I clicked on mine and it didn't show up because I had a setting earlier. So you can come to View, Perspective Grid, and this is where you can choose 1 point, 2 point, or 3 point perspective. So I'm in View, Perspective Grid, and I'm going to go to 2 point perspective, and this will pop up here. And we have a lot of options. This diamond shape on the ground plane, you can see my cursor changes, we'll move the whole thing around. Then we can move the horizon line around, and you can see how that's affecting the grid itself. We can also take the circles and we can move the vanishing points. And if you drag the vanishing point, that will move the horizon line. And you can pull this up, so you really have a lot of control over what your grid looks like. So take time to set up your grid and get it looking the way you want. So just to get started, I'll show you how the basics of this works. We have this little widget here, and when you're clicked on each plane, so there's three different planes. There's the left grid, which is number 1 on the keyboard. There's a right grid, which is number 3, and there's the horizontal grid, which is number 2, which is like the ground plane. So I'm going to click on the left grid, number 1, And then I'm just going to take my rectangle tool, and you can see I'm drawing on this. And if I come over here, it's still on this left plane, so it's not drawing on the plane. If I want to switch, I'm going to do Control Z to get rid of that. If I want to switch to the right plane, the right grid, I have to click over here and switch to it. And then if I want to draw on the floor, that's down here. And you can go outside of these grid lines. You know, you can draw them anywhere. Just the thing to be aware of is that you have to be selected on the plane you want to draw on. So you can draw anywhere outside of the grid. And then if I want to adjust the grid again, I can come back into my perspective grid tool, and then I have the options to adjust the grid, but make sure you realize that the grid is just a guide. So see how my green rectangles that I drew, nothing is changing because the grid isn't a dynamic tool like that. It's just a guide to help you set stuff up. So you really want to get your grid in place first before you start drawing on it, because once you start drawing these rectangles or whatever you're drawing on it, they're not going to change when you move the grid around. So you're going to make the 2-point grid. Just practice a little bit drawing on here so you can get used to switching between the planes depending on where you want to draw. And if you don't have in the perspective grid, you do want to have the snap to grid on. If you're drawing really precise architectural stuff, you probably want to snap to the grid, but if that's annoying you and it's snapping to the grid, you can turn that off. So that's up to you. So we're going to be applying 2 different types of buildings to the grid, at least. So I want you to do one building, at least one building that you create flat, and I'll go over how to do that, and then apply to the grid. And you must keep this flat design as a flat design in your gray area of your document, and then make a copy of it to apply to the grid so that I can see that you made it flat. And then I want you to also practice drawing some kind of building or architectural structure on the actual grid. So I want you to practice doing both ways. And I want you to get inspired by architecture. There's so much cool architecture out there. And I love Art Nouveau. That's one of the styles I really like. So take some time, look at buildings around you or buildings from around the world. Take a look at some pictures. And I found this one super inspiring. So I copied it onto my desktop, and then I put it in my file here. I can turn it on. I grabbed the photo and I'm using it as a guide. So you can put it in its own layer, which I think is helpful. I have my Art Nouveau building layer here. Let me make this bigger. So I have a whole layer called Art Nouveau. I have the actual reference image in here, and I'm going to use it to pick colors and design. And I'm going to really simplify it. So you can see I'm not expecting you to go crazy, but be inspired by something that will help you immensely with this project. Get inspired by a certain type of architecture, an actual building that you know and love, and then think about how you can simplify those shapes. This is how I've simplified it. So you're going to start with the flat design, and you're going to draw that on just a flat grid. So I have the perspective grid up. I'm just going to go to View, Perspective Grid, and hide it to get rid of it. And then I want to see the actual flat grid. So View, Show Grid, and I want to make sure I have Snap to Grid on. That's also in View. So now when I start drawing shapes, if I zoom in, I can line it up, and you can really only tell when you're actually doing this. It's going to snap, the lines are going to snap to the different grid points. So I can really get perfect and geometric with this. So I'm going to make a shape and start with the simple shapes, break it down into the very simple shapes. So I'm just going to start with a rectangle, and then I want to make this the same color. So I'm holding the eyedropper tool, which is over here, or you can just press down on the letter I on your keyboard and grab that color. So then you can come in here and you can make darker and lighter swatches too of that, depending on what you like. So I can keep this swatch, I can take it from here and I can drag it into my swatches so I can use it over and over again. And then maybe sometimes in the beginning I just grab a couple swatches that I like from my photo, my inspiration photo, and then I can use them over and over again. So you're just going to start by building basic shapes, and I want to do this shape on the top. So I'm going to do a rectangle in the center here, and I'm going to fill it with a darker color, and then I'll do a circle to make the top. So I'm holding Shift Alt to make a perfect circle. And then I'm pressing V. I'm going to get it lined up. And I'm going to hold Shift to actually get it matched up here. And then I can hold Shift and I'm selected on both the circle and the rectangle that I made. I can come into my Pathfinder and unite them. So now that's that shape. And then if I want to make it look like it has a little shading, if I come into the appearance and add a shadow, it's not really going to give me what I'm looking for. Let's see what that looks like. You know, because that gives a weird shadow up here and that's not really going to make sense for the architecture. So I'm going to cancel that. I could do a blur with this. So I could Control C to copy, Control F to paste in front. So now I have two of those, and I can make it a lighter color on the top. So I can go even lighter. And then I can hold Shift and make it a little bit of a smaller shape. And I'm thinking about just creating a shadow. Now this is where the snap to grid is not helping me because it's only, I'm trying to nudge it with my arrow tools and it's only going between each grid line, which I don't like. I want to get it kind of in between the grid lines. So I can just come to view and turn off the snap to grid, and then I can nudge it ever so slightly. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to move it a little bit. So I'm just kind of creating a shadow, but I don't want that shadow too much on the top. And then I can do a blend with these. So you can set yours up a lot nicer, but I can select both. I can go to Object, Blend, and we want to do the blend options first. And you want to change this to specified steps. This is the same way we made the shadow in the hand lettering. I'm going to say 50 for this and press OK. And then we have to go to Object, Blend, Make. It's those two steps. And that gives us a little bit of a better shadow than the previous one. So you can make some shapes with just rectangles on here. You might want to turn the snap to grid back on. I'm going to press I and grab this color. And then you can make little designs in here and you can get as creative as you want. And what I do, I'm going to press I and get one of these colors. And I'm going to go back to V and move this around. And what I do is get them set up, hold Alt, only make this one time. If you have some details, architectural details like this, don't draw them 5 different times, draw them once. So get them all set up, get them looking great, and then I can select on all of that, hold Shift to deselect the back, and then I can hold Alt and grab this and move it to the other side. So you're not making a ton of extra work for yourself. And you're going to get yours looking really good. I want to take this and right-click, arrange, and bring to front. So those are sitting behind it. Okay, so you're going to make yours even. Obviously, this isn't in the middle. And then to make windows, same thing. You're just going to make one and then make copies. So I'm going to make a rectangle. I'm holding I and picking one of these light colors. And then I'm doing an ellipse. And I'm going to hold Shift and Alt. And press V and get it down. Get it all intersected there. Just take your time and make that look great. And get it the shape you want, and press Shift to get both selected. Come to your Pathfinder and unite. And then for this, you might want to do a gradient. So I would come in here to my gradient and add a gradient. And you want to change the angle here to 90. And then I don't want the dark on the top, I want the dark on the bottom. So I just press this little tool here, reverse gradient. And it looks like in my picture just a little bit of dark on the bottom and most of it's super light. I can change the white color just by double clicking. Okay, so if you have the color set up in your swatches, you can come here to swatches and get that set up to the color you want. Maybe the darker one won't be as dark. You can really decide on however you want that to look and make it look great. I think adding a stroke is nice for this, so I'm just gonna do like a 1-point stroke. I don't want my stroke to be orange. I want it to be dark gray or black. Let me zoom in so you can see. So there's a stroke on there. And then sometimes I think it's nice to have the stroke be not uniform. And so it's just kind of dark around the bottom and the top has a highlight, but that's totally up to you. You can play around with that and you can get as fancy as you want. And then I can get this to the right size and I can hold Alt and copy it. And I can get these spaced out exactly how I want them. And then I can hold Shift and grab both and hold Alt and move those to the other side. And now I can hold Shift and copy all 4 and hold Alt and make my rows of windows like that. So you're gonna spend a bunch of time making your stuff look awesome. If you wanna make an archway, you can do a similar way as we did earlier, but let's see what that would look like. So I'm just gonna make a rectangle lined up here. And I'm going to make it this color. I'm going to make it the actual size of my other building. I turned the snap to grid off, so that's not helping me. But let's get it lined up. Okay, and then I'm going to grab the ellipse tool and I'm gonna think about how I want this archway to be. I'm gonna make it darker, it's not gonna matter, but just so I can see where it is. I'm gonna hold V and I'm gonna get it lined up. So get yours all lined up, and so I'm gonna select, and you can make multiple arches this way. So I'm gonna select both the ellipse and the little rectangle that I made, and I can come, you don't have to make an extra rectangle, you can do it with the one that's already there. I don't know why I made an extra one, that's just how my brain works. So you can just do minus front, and then that's gone, and then you can unite the two. You might have to send this to back. So I guess you'd save a step if you just cut the archway out of your original shape. So you can make all kinds of arches, all kinds of details. So I want the building you create on the flat grid to be super detailed and have a lot going on. And then I have it over here, and you're gonna right click and make sure to group this. I'll show you how to do that. So make sure all of your details of your building are selected, right click and group. And then you're gonna apply it to the perspective grid on another artboard. So maybe keep this artboard just for like designing the flat designs. You're gonna have at least one building. I'm gonna come to view and I'm gonna turn off the grid. So just hide grid, because we don't need that. And I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna make a new artboard. Let's see, with the artboard tool right here. And you can just draw a new one, any size you want. And I'm gonna come back into the selection tool. So I have this, and I'm gonna make a copy of it. So Alt, copy. You wanna be working on the copy because I wanna see the original. So you always wanna leave one flat and work with the copies. So now I'm gonna come to my perspective grid. So view, perspective grid, show grid. Actually I had that over here, so maybe I will move all this stuff out of the way. So I have my perspective grid, I have the copy of the building that I want to use, and now under the perspective grid tool, there's the perspective selection tool. So we're on the perspective selection tool, we have the grid, and I have the left grid face selected up here, and I can just drag it in and we can see it's kind of giving us an idea of where it's going. And I can hold Alt and make a copy, and it's gonna stay on that face, and I can use my arrow tools and get it all set up the way I want and make it look awesome. So you can make a whole row like this. You can really perfect it. So select the face you want to be on. So now I want to get it on the right grid. I'm coming back to my original. Make sure to hold Alt to grab a copy, and you can see that copy, and release your mouse first and then release Alt. So you keep that copy. You always want the flat copy to go back to. And you can make it look like that. Now, if you want to see what it looks like without the grid, you're going to obviously spend more time getting yours looking great. You can come to View, Perspective Grid, Hide Grid, and I always do that a couple times just to check it out, because you want to get stuff lined up, and this probably needs to be a little bit of a different size, but you can spend time making yours look great. Okay, so we have this, but it still looks really flat, so we can do some simple things to give it some more dimension. So they're drawn on the left plane here, but I'm gonna add sort of like what's gonna make it look like an alleyway and give the building some depth. I have to draw that on the right plane. So let me get in my perspective tool, let me select on the right grid here. And of course, this is gonna depend on where yours is drawn. So I'm in a regular rectangle tool, and I'm just gonna draw this so it goes behind here. And I'm gonna pull it out pretty far just to give myself space. And then I'm gonna right click, arrange, send to back. So already I think that's looking better. I also wanna do the same with the top here. So I'm just gonna fix it later, but I'll right click, arrange, send to back, and then I can zoom in and I can come with my perspective selection tool, and I want that to hit the top of it. And then this is causing a little bit of a problem, so I can just come in my direct selection tool A, and I can click on this anchor point, and I can just kind of make it go exactly where I need it to go and get it looking right. That looks a lot better. Just that little bit adds a lot of detail and interest to this that wasn't there before. Now I'm gonna make a sidewalk, so let me zoom out a little more. So I'm gonna make a sidewalk coming this way, so that means I need to let me get back in my perspective grid tool. I'm gonna select this left grid. Oh no, I'm sorry. It needs to be on the ground plane, so the horizontal grid. So the one on the bottom. I'm in my rectangle tool. I'm gonna start somewhere out here. Remember, you don't have to draw all the way on the grid. You can go off the grid. And I'm gonna make it go back so it like fills in that alleyway. So I'm gonna right click, arrange, send to back. I'm just gonna make it a much lighter color so you can see what's happening. See how that looks better? And you'll have other buildings and stuff on here that will cover it up, but it looks better if it's filled in there. And then if I wanna adjust it, I can come and right click and come to my perspective selection tool, and I can make this bigger or smaller. You can really, you'll have another sidewalk intersecting with it. Maybe it doesn't need to be quite so big. And also you can crop and adjust the artboard to cut off this extra space. So make this a little bigger. So think about how your sidewalk will look. And then we're gonna give a little depth to the sidewalk. So for that, I need to be on the left grid. I'm gonna come back into my rectangle tool. I'm gonna make it a darker color just so it looks like it's dropping off the side. I'm gonna intersect here. So you're just thinking about, and I'll make it the whole length of the sidewalk. And that's way too big. So I need to come in my perspective selection tool, and I can just adjust that there. And you can make it even darker if you think that makes more sense for yours. So give it a little more depth by creating those extra elements, you know, create a little alleyway, make sure to add some depth here where it makes sense. I'd put another rectangle over here, and we'll see how, you know, depending on how these connect. And then you'll start building another building actually on the grid itself. So on the other side, you can start building shapes, and you can start making windows and see how that feels to build it on the actual grid. So similar way how we did it flat, but now I want you trying to build a detailed building on the actual perspective grid and see how that goes. To add details to this sidewalk, I'm just going to make sidewalk lines. So I'm right here in the line segment tool, and I'm on my perspective grid. Now I want to be on the bottom here, which is number 2, this ground plane. I have a gray color selected for my stroke. Let me get a darker color so you can see what's going on. Okay, so my stroke is a darker color. So I'm using the lines on my grid to draw the lines for the sidewalk. And if you hold Shift while drawing it, it will snap to that grid. So I'm going to draw one line. You can, of course, increase the stroke here. And as they go further back into perspective, the stroke can get smaller and smaller. So the thing you want to do is count the number of lines in between. And for yours, it might be different. So I might go 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. So then you'll do 5 every 5th for mine. Yours might be totally different. I'm going to draw a line, and then they'll get closer and closer together as they get further away in perspective, and it will look more realistic. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm holding Shift and drawing, just dragging and drawing it out. And then counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, coming up here, holding Shift and dragging that out. So you can see how it's snapping to the grid. They're getting closer and closer. You can make yours, you know, more exact and spend more time. And for this one, maybe I'd start, you know, maybe you could do it 1. If the first one was 2, you could start making it 1.5 and get super realistic and make that look awesome and really change your colors around and stuff. So add details to yours that make it look more realistic like that. And then the next thing we're going to do is like a pop-out element. So maybe there's a marquee or a sign, or maybe you have a part of the building that sticks out a little bit more. So I'm going to do like as if there was a little sign on the front here. And I'm going to make it a color that is very easy to see. So let me make it like a bright blue so you can just see what's going on here. Maybe I'll leave the stroke on because that might help you see too. So I'm just in my rectangle tool, and I'm on this plane here. So I've clicked onto the left plane, which is number 1. You can start learning the key commands. It's 1, 2, 3, if that helps you. And I'm just going to draw where I want my sign to pop out. But it's laying flat on the building, right? So I can go into my perspective selection tool, which I get to by right-clicking here, and I can hold the number 5 and just pull that out to give it a little dimension. And then I'm going to add the sides and the top. So to add the side here, I need to go to the right plane because that's facing this way. And this is when you start adding details, you want to start thinking about where the light is coming from in your illustration. So for mine, I'm going to say it's coming this way, facing the front of the building. So this would be in shadow on the side. So I'm just going to double click on the color I have and make it a darker version for the shadow. And then I'm going to come back into my rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw it out on that plane. And then for the top one, I think I'll leave that a dark color too. That's a little confusing because it's on the ground plane. So it would be on the same plane as the sidewalk, right? So just think about how yours is lined up. And this one, I think, is going to need some editing. So I drew the rectangle, but it's not perfect. So I'm going to come back into my perspective selection tool And you can make some edits here and just get that, oops, just get that right. So take some time to make yours look good and move it around. So I want you to add at least one element that's kind of sticking out. You could do an element that has an archway in it. You could make a whole kind of interesting, you can make a whole row of arches that you can see through. It could be super interesting. So think about what you could do. The next thing we're gonna do is make a little shadow. So an easy way to do this, I think, is just to take a rectangle. I'm gonna start on the left grid. You can also draw your shadow shapes out in the pen tool if you want to make them more interesting, if you have more complex shapes. But I'm just gonna do it here. I'm making a black rectangle with a fill and no stroke. And I'm just gonna come under here and draw it on this plane. And again, you're thinking about where your light is coming from. And then I'm gonna select it. I'm just gonna right click, arrange, send backward. Make sure it's behind. Maybe I can bring this one to the front. Arrange, bring to front. Just want to make sure that shadow is behind the object that's actually casting the shadow. So then I'm going to come into my transparency window, my transparency panel, and I'll make it multiply, and then I'll lower the opacity. So that's an easy way to make some shadows. You can get it wherever you want, how dark or light as you want. And when you have the multiply blend mode on the shadow, then it's automatically going to mix in with whatever colors are behind it. Let me take this grid off so you can actually see it. Then it's going to blend in with whatever colors are behind it. So it just kind of automatically makes a nice shadow for you without you having to do a ton of work. And then you can take this shadow, and if you had a similar element here, you could copy it and apply it to other objects. So that's a quick shadow. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about is making text. So get back into my grid, and I'm going to just draw text flat. So I'm going to come out here. So I'm just going to start writing text. I'm gonna make it bigger so you can see. So you can just, you're gonna start out with the text flat. Obviously, make it as big or small as you want. Whatever, change around the font and everything. Get it looking awesome. So then with my perspective selection tool, I'm gonna grab it. I'm gonna make sure I have the plane that I want to be on. So if I want it to go on this sign, that is the left plane. So think about what plane you're on. So you have the plane selected, you're in the perspective selection tool, and then you can grab your text and apply it anywhere you want. So you can come in and adjust it. If it's snapping to the grid in a way that you don't like, if your grid lines are too big, you can just do view perspective grid and uncheck snap to grid, and then you can have a little more control. Okay, so you can play around with that, add at least one element of text somewhere. One thing I want to show you before we go any further is locking the station point. So I know when we started, I said when you move the grid around, that the objects on the grid don't move with it. And that was a little bit of a lie. Sorry about that, but there is a way to move it a little bit, but it's not perfect. So we go to View, Perspective Grid, and lock station point. And with this, I need to come into my perspective grid tool. So all of these options show up, like the circles and the diamonds. And with this, we can take the vanishing points and kind of rotate them. And you see the building moves, but all these other things that I added on to give it depth do not move with it. So that's why it's an imperfect tool. And that's why I want you to think about building your stuff on the grid. See how this part of the sidewalk didn't move, but it is an option that if you really don't like the angle and you've done a lot of work, you can rotate your vanishing points around a little bit, and then just know you're going to have to make some other adjustments in there. Okay, so I want you to make a background, and that means like sky, clouds, grass, hills, whatever makes sense for you. So the important thing with the sky is that See how I clicked out of this and no active grid is selected when that's blue? So I'm gonna make a sky in the background. So I have my rectangular marquee and I'm gonna get a blue color, and you're gonna spend more time picking an awesome color. The important thing about this is that the sky stops at the horizon line, okay? The sky needs to stop there. I can just right click, arrange, send to back. If I had the sky stop below the horizon line, that wouldn't make any sense for the perspective. So that's a really important thing to remember, is to have your sky stop at this horizon eye line. And then you could do grass or concrete or whatever's, gonna make sense. Let me just get out of there. For the ground, for your ground. So it really depends on what kind of scene you have. So I could just do concrete back here and fill up the foreground space, arrange, send to back, and just make that look good. And obviously you'll fill in all of this space so it doesn't look empty. And then you can do stuff like clouds with the blob brush tool, which is underneath the paintbrush. So just right click to get there. I can choose white. Sorry, I'm selected on the rectangle. So I'm just clicking, I'm just in my selection tool, which is V, and I'm clicking somewhere in the gray area so nothing's selected. And I'm going back to my blob brush, making sure that it's white. And then you can just draw clouds. Yours will look better. Let me get in closer. I press Control Z to get rid of that. And I am going to make my brush bigger. Let's see how that looks. My mouse is not the greatest right now and I'm not working with my tablet, but you can fill this all in, and if you make the brush bigger with your right bracket key, you can really get it filled in nicely and make it look exactly the shape you want. And remember, with the blob brush, it's making it a shape. So I'm going to press V and click on it, and you can see it's a shape. I can go back to the brush and fill in this stuff to get rid of that, and that looks better. Okay, this is a sad cloud, but you will make nice clouds. Okay, so you'll get a cloud. You can hold Alt and copy it and make multiple clouds, and then you can flip it around and rotate it, and you can make more clouds with your blob brush. That doesn't look awesome, but you know what I'm saying. Make a couple clouds. And then you can make mountains. Remember our very first project, you made mountains with the different shape tools. You can also draw some kind of hill with the pen tool. So let me get clicked out of there. I'm gonna choose some green, and I'm gonna come into my pen tool, and you can just make like hills or mountains in the background, however you want them to look. Or make some kind of element in the backgrounds, because we're gonna do that atmospheric perspective thing I was talking about in the beginning. So give it some kind of interest in the background to show the space, that it's going back into space. Let me close that, that's not helping. And then I would just come to the horizon line with this, because there are mountains in the background. Fill that. You're gonna make yours nicer, but maybe I'll just bring this down because that looks really bad. Okay, so you could do another, you could take these, you could do Control C, Control F to paste in front, and then I can make it an even lighter green, and I can just make 2 layers of it. You know, you can do whatever you want. You can obviously spend a lot more time on yours. And these I'm going to send backward. You can just keep sending backward until you get it to where you want. That can take some time. You can also learn the key commands. Sometimes I just do send to back, and then I take this and do arrange, send to back. Okay, so get your stuff in the right order just by arranging it. And then we can add some 3D trees. So something that was happening when I was practicing this is that I had a new layer where I was building my extra design elements and my background elements. So I'll just show you what that looks like, what a mistake I came up with that you might also have an issue with. So I'm going to draw a half of a tree and revolve it. And the thing about revolving the trees that I found is that they kind of have to be like bulbous, not realistic looking trees, because if you make them realistic, they can look kind of funny. So I'm just going to draw like almost like a shrubbery kind of thing, like a topiary plant. And then I'm going to close that shape. We're not seeing it because of this big rectangle here. There, so I'm just gonna turn that off because I had that big white gray rectangle. Okay, so I have this shape. You can obviously, that's meant to represent half of a shrub or bush. And you can obviously spend some time and get yours looking good. I'm just gonna use my anchor point tool to straighten that one out. And then I'm gonna use my A direct selection to kind of make this look like it's sitting on the ground. Okay, so you spend more time on yours making it look shrubbish. I think once you see what I'm doing, you'll have a better idea of how yours might look. Okay, so I'm selected on that, and then I go to Effect 3D Revolve. And we obviously want the preview on. That is the wrong way, so I just want to switch to the right edge. And you know how to do all this stuff with the light. Get the light to match the light in your drawing, in your illustration, and press OK. And now I'm going to keep this off to the side so I have like the base model, and you can see how the 3D Revolve works. You guys know how that works, so you can see how you can make it work on your drawing. So I'm going to take the perspective selection tool. I'm going to select the plane I'm on. So I want it to be like on the sidewalk, but it will be on the plane where the building face is because it's facing up, right? So I'm holding Alt to make a copy. See how my cursor changes when I hold Alt. I'm in the perspective selection tool. I'm holding Alt and I'm dragging that over here. And now we don't see it. And the reason we don't see it is because I have it on this other layer that was messing me up earlier when I was practicing this. So if you don't see it and it's driving you a little nuts, like sometimes I was seeing it and it was like half of it was showing up like that, and it was driving me crazy, and I was doing arrange, bring to front, and it's like not working, and it's because it's on the other layer. And maybe that's obvious and you guys know that, but you just have to drag the layer on top, and then it's on top. And when it's here in the perspective selection tool, you can adjust it. You can obviously move it wherever you want, and it's going to get bigger and smaller. And I can hold Alt and make copies. Release the mouse first. So I'm holding Alt, I'm releasing the mouse, then releasing Alt. So you can make a bunch of, I want you to have at least one 3D shape that you repeat, and you can make them whatever you want, really. They could be planters, they could be any kind of decorative element, they can be these weird looking shrubs, whatever you prefer. Okay, so there's one thing I want you to think about is the blur in the background. So remember the atmospheric perspective. So I can make the hills in the back blurry by just going to Effect, Blur, and I can do this Gaussian blur, put the preview on. That's super blurry. You know, maybe you just want it a little bit. So that's 2, maybe I'll try 5 and see how that looks. And then you can remember that number, and maybe the layer in front of that will be less blurry, right? Because these mountains are technically closer. So that was 5, maybe this will just be 2. And you can make the blur go as it goes further in the distance, it's more blurry. Another thing you can do is do that with the building. So I'm gonna actually take another copy of this building. I'm gonna put it on the other side. So I'm gonna come in to my perspective selection tool. I'm gonna select on my right grid, and I'm going to, hold Alt to take a copy of this, and I'm gonna move it over here. So let's say I have something like this further in the distance, and I wanna desaturate it, but I have it grouped. I have all these windows. I don't really want to ungroup it and change all the colors. So a quick way, or an easier way than changing all the colors, I'm gonna select the building. I have it with my regular selection. I'm doing Control-C, Control-S to copy and paste in front, and we can see I have the copy in the background. So what I'm gonna do is take the copy in the background. You can see it doesn't show that I have any fill or stroke color because it's so many different things, and I'm just gonna make it like a grayish, so it's all one color. And you can do that with the stroke too. Just make the stroke and the fill all one color. And then I'm gonna take the front copy, I'm gonna move it back. You could do the copy, you know, if you wanna get it perfect, you don't have to move the front one. I just moved that to show you what I'm actually doing. You could do the copy, paste in front and lock the front one and just change the color of the back one because that's what will be selected, which I think we did in hand lettering. Or you can move it back, it's not that big of a deal. And then come into your transparency and change the blend mode. Yours, what worked for mine was lighten, and then change the opacity. You can try a couple different ones. It really might depend on your colors and what you have going on behind it. But I think that's kind of a cool way. Let me turn the grid off. That's kind of a cool way to desaturate it and use those blend modes. And some stuff might get lost, but you can play around with making that look like it's further in the distance, and that's gonna give you that atmospheric perspective. And then you could even give this a blur. Maybe a very slight blur, maybe it's just 1. Let's see what that looks like. You know, and it's just a very slight blur, but that is way more, looks like it's way further in the distance than the buildings in the front. Okay, so the last thing you're gonna do, you're gonna get all your stuff up, and then you might have some weird elements, like in the front, this might not look exactly how you want, so you can crop it just using your artboard. So you come into the artboard tool and you can just crop it. There's no size requirement, so I mean it can't be miniature, but you can move your artboard is what I'm saying to crop it if you have stuff that doesn't look right, especially in this front plane here. It might not look great. So get your artboard looking awesome, and then you're going to export just this artboard, and you might have stuff on a lot of other artboards, but I just want to see this artboard as your final, and then I'll check your Illustrator files to make sure you have the one flat building so I can see that you did that flat. All right, have fun.